Welcome to Starbound. If you're tired of the AI-generated slop and you want real human storytelling, please subscribe to support the channel. My name is the Voice Ogre, I will be your narrator, and let's get into today's story. The ping of an incoming voice was more dangerous than a blaster bolt. It heralded the digital debris, the cascading, infuriating stream of post-combat administrative fallout that followed every scuffle. There were the insurance claims you couldn't file because your policy didn't cover acts of organized crime you instigated. The repair manifests that read like obituaries for irreplaceable components. And inevitably, the irate, all-caps message from the depot manager about the new unsolicited skylights in his refueling bay roof, complete with a bill inflated by a hefty inconvenience fee. Halden Ulrich grunted, the sound a low percussive note in the cacophony of the firefight. He slammed a Crimson Syndicate enforcer's helmeted head into a sparking console. The satisfying thunk of plasticsteel on Duracrete was immediately followed by a less satisfying shower of angry yellow sparks that singed the sleeve of his favorite synth leather jacket. He'd had that jacket for years. It was perfectly worn in, molded to his shoulders, a silent testament to a dozen brawls and 100 narrow escapes. "I'm back," he muttered to the unconscious goon slumped to the grated floor. "As for the dry cleaning bill." The cargo bay of his freighter, the Stray Dog, was currently a hellish environment. The air reeked of superheated circuitry, burnt propellant from the blaster bolts, and the acrid, coppery stench of the Enforcer's recently voided bowels. Blaster fire, a festive crimson that Halden found terribly gauche, stitched new, searing patterns across the already scarred and dented bulkheads. Each bolt left a glowing circular wound in the metal. A fresh story of violence layered over years of the same. He was mid-swing with a heavy-duty fire extinguisher, aiming to rearrange the facial features of another chrome-domed idiot taking cover behind a stack of cargo crates, when a section of the floor plating directly behind the goon hissed open, with a puff of hydraulic steam. From a hidden smuggling compartment, a space Halden reserved for contraband too volatile for the main hold, two figures emerged. The first was an alien woman, regal in a way that seemed utterly out of place for someone crawling out of a greasy hole in the floor. She moved with the silent, fluid grace of a hunting cat, each motion economical and deliberate. Her features were sharp and elegant, her skin the pale luminescence of a shrouded moon, and her eyes the color of a stormy winter sky. The second was a small boy, her son, maybe 8 years old, who clung to her leg. His brow was furrowed in fear, but his small jaw was set in a defiant line that promised future trouble for anyone who crossed him. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Halden groaned, his swing faltering for a critical second. The universe had a truly malicious sense of comedic timing. "You'd see the reason the crime syndicate is up my ass right now." The woman paid him no mind. As the enforcer Halden had been beating turned, startled by the sound behind him, she flowed forward. Her hand chopped down on his wrist, the edge of her palm striking a nerve cluster just below the gauntlet. The enforcer's fingers went numb and useless, his blaster fire clattering to the deck. A palm-heel strike to the chin, delivered with brutal upward momentum, snapped his head back. It collapsed like a sack of spoiled rations, his chrome helmet bouncing once before rolling to a stop. She didn't even breathe hard. Her stance was perfect, her balance undisturbed. Halden, momentarily stunned by the display of lethal poetry, finished his swing out of sheer momentum, braining the first goon with a fire extinguisher for good measure. He dropped the now dented cylinder with a loud, ringing clang that echoed in the sudden lull. "Okay," he panted, looking from the unconscious bodies to the alien woman and child. "I've got a rule. No stowaways, especially not the kind that are clearly better at fighting than I am. It's embarrassing for the captain." The woman's gaze swept over him, analytical and unimpressed. She was clearly of a non-human lineage, but of a humanoid strain he'd never encountered. Taller than him, with an athletic build that a simple, dark gray tunic couldn't hide. Her people, whoever they were, had won the genetic lottery. He realized, with a dawning, gut-wrenching certainty that felt like swallowing ice, hiding an alien mother and her child. And judging by the professional-grade killers attempting to ventilate his ship with military-grade pulse rifles, this was a mother with some very, very angry ex-in-laws. "How did you get into my Class G shielded hold?" Halden snapped. His knuckles were white on the flight yoke of the stray dog. The refueling depot shrank in the aft view screen, a pockmarked bauble trailing wisps of smoke from the holes they'd recently added. Alarms blared a cheerful, panicked chorus around the cramped cockpit, each one a different color, a different pitch, a different impending system failure. The woman was already strapped into the co-pilot seat, her posture ramrod straight despite the ship shuddering from a violent takeoff. The boy was secured in a small jump seat behind them, his small hands gripping the safety webbing with a force that belied his age. "My name is Skylara Invictus," she said, her voice a low, melodic contralto that was completely at odds with the surrounding chaos. "This is my son, Nico, and we had help." "Clearly," Halden shot back, banking the ship hard to port to avoid a chunk of debris from the depot's mangled docking arm. The maneuver sent a cascade of loose tools clattering across the cockpit floor. "Hope that didn't feel the need to introduce themselves before turning my ship into the centerpiece of a syndicate firefight." "We are fleeing my husband, Baron Crate of the Crimson Syndicate," she continued, her tone as placid as if she were discussing inconvenient weather patterns. Halden's blood went cold. A sudden, sharp chill that had nothing to do with the failing life support. He risked a glance at her. Her face was serene, composed, a mask of aristocratic calm. "Crate, the Baron Crate, the guy who scans people for using the wrong fork at dinner, the guy whose name makes planetary governors wet themselves and declare spontaneous holidays in his honor." "The one and only," she confirmed, her tone flat. "He is possessive." "Possessive? The man redefines the term. Here's a list of things that are mine, and it includes 3 star systems and the concept of the color red. Why in the name of all that is profitable are you on my ship?" "My original escape plan encountered a fatal complication," she said, the word fatal delivered with an icy finality that allowed no argument. "My guards were killed. They were stranded on the depot. My chief of security's final act was to hack the depot's manifest for a viable escape vessel. Your ship was listed as having a shielded compartment of sufficient size and density. He transmitted the access schematic and the override codes to my datapad before he died." She paused, her gaze fixed upon the chaos as outside another ship, a sleek syndicate patrol cruiser began to pull away from the station. "The only other thing that he gave us was a military-grade ghost signal emitter. It was already on a dying power cell. We had less than 5 minutes before it failed, and we became visible to every scanner in the system. Your ship was the only outbound vessel prepping for immediate departure. Boarding you wasn't a plan. It was the only option left to us." Just then, a proximity alert shrieked, a high-pitched wail of imminent doom. The Syndicate patrol cruiser, late to the party but eager to make up for it, was peeling away from the station in hot pursuit, its weapon ports glowing with malevolent intent. Halden swore, a long, creative string of curses involving obsolete deities and improbable biological acts. He slammed his palm on a console and shoved the throttle to the firewall. The stray dog groaned in protest, its old frame shuddering, the engine screaming like a tortured beast. The ship lurched violently to port as he dodged a volley of ruby-red energy blasts that sizzled through the space where his cockpit had been a moment before. The sudden, brutal maneuver threw Skylara hard against her restraints. Instinctively, her hand shot out, clamping down on Halden's forearm with a grip of surprising strength. It was the desperate, visceral reaction of someone holding on in a hurricane. Her fingers dug into his flesh, a conduit for all her terror and determination, grounding him in the heart of this chaos. The cacophony of alarms seemed to fade into the background. All he could feel was the fierce pressure of her hand, the frantic, hammering pulse in her wrist against his skin. He glanced at her hand on his arm, then at her face. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the enemy ship, a predator sizing up another predator. He gave the yoke a sharp twist, sending them into a spiraling dive toward the station's orbital debris field. He pulled his arm back as the ship stabilized, his skin tingling where she touched him. "All right," he growled, forcing his attention back to the controls. "Let's see if we can't make them regret following us." Once they'd shaken the patrol cruiser by diving into a dense debris field that would have torn a fancier, less dented ship to ribbons, Alden set the stray dog on a lazy, drifting course. He killed the main drive, letting the ship pretend it was just another piece of forgotten junk, floating in the orbital graveyard. He swiveled in his chair, leveling a glare at Skylara. "All right, here's the deal. My life expectancy, which was already statistically dubious, has just plummeted into laughably brief. I'm a smuggler, not a revolutionary. I don't do causes, and I sure as hell don't do suicide missions against the single most powerful crime lord in the Outer Rim." "I do not expect you to," she said calmly. "I require passage. I can pay." Halden snorted, a harsh, dismissive sound. "With what? Craig probably cancelled all your credits the moment he realized you were gone. Unless you were hiding a planet's worth of refined platinum in your shoe, you've got nothing I want." "Not nothing," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "Before I left, I rerouted a significant portion of my personal assets. Not currency, which can be traced. Something far more valuable and untraceable. A cache of priceless, raw sun shards, hidden aboard a derelict cruiser. It lies within the graveyard, an asteroid field not far from this vector." Halden's brain, a finely tuned machine for calculating risk versus reward, started clicking and whirring. The graveyard was treacherous, a ship killer, filled with unstable asteroid clusters and the ghosts of failed prospectors. But sun shards, a whole cache of them could set him up for life. A quiet moon, a private cantina with a no syndicate sign at the door. No more dodging goons, except for the giant universe-sized syndicate goon who is currently hunting them. "The risk is astronomical," he said, shaking his head. "Even if we get there, even if we find these crystals, Craig will never stop hunting you, and me by extension. He will peel the skin from my bones and use it as a dust cover for his favorite torture droid." "That is a risk, yes," she conceded. "But consider your alternative. You drop us at the next port. The Syndicate finds us. They question us. And when they learn you aided our escape, however unwillingly, do you truly believe that they will simply let you go? Baron Craig does not tolerate loose ends." Halden pursed his lips at the woman. "And I suppose that I couldn't trust you to keep your mouth shut about me." She shrugged. A hunted mother wanting to protect her child was the most ruthless creature in the galaxy. "The Syndicate soldiers saw your ship. Even if they don't know who you are, they will in time." She was right. He was screwed either way. A smart play was to cut his losses, find the quietest, deepest hole in the galaxy, and die there. He was about to tell her just that, to voice the sensible, cowardly option. And then he looked at the boy. Nico was unstrapping himself from the jump seat. He had moved to stand beside his mother's chair, his small jaw set. No crying or whimpering. He was glaring at Halden, his stormy eyes, so like his mother's, burning with a silent, furious fire that said, "I am not a victim. I am not cargo. Don't you dare treat me like one." It was a look Halden knew immediately, intimately. It was a look he'd given the universe every day of his life from the age 10 and up. It was the defiant stare of someone who had nothing left to lose and was ready to bite the kneecaps off of anyone who tried to take the nothing that he had. The cold calculus of greed and pragmatism shattered. In its place rose a hot, unfamiliar surge of something. Empathy? Insanity? He couldn't tell the difference. But the decision was made. He was choosing the proactive, insane, probably gonna get him killed path. He scrubbed a hand over his face, a long, weary sigh escaping his lips. Fine, he snapped, the word tasting like rust and bad decisions. Fine. We'll go to your stupid space diamonds, but my funeral is on your tab. I want fireworks, a eulogy that mentions my roguish charm, and an open bar, a good open bar, with a top-shelf stuff. A slight smile touched Skylara's lips, the first genuine crack in her icy composure. It's a deal. Making a pit stop at Gritstone was a necessary evil. A sprawling, grimy hub of commerce built into a hollowed-out asteroid. A place where a ship like the Stray Dog could get lost in the noise, provided it went dark and stayed that way. They needed supplies, fuel, and a new identity for the ship's transponder, but landing meant submitting to docking scans. Scans that even Kraid's influence couldn't bypass instantly. It bought them a few hours at best. We need to go completely cold, Alden announced, shutting down the last of the ship's non-essential systems. The main lights died, plunging the cockpit into a gloomy twilight lit only by the station's distant, gaudy neon glow reflecting off the viewport. No power signatures, no heat bloom, nothing. That means that hiding somewhere in the passive thermal scanners won't ping. Come on. He led them out of the cockpit and down a narrow, vibrating corridor to the engine compartment. The door hissed open, releasing a wave of oppressive, metallic heat that felt like a physical blow. The Stray Dog's main drive, even when cold, radiated a residual warmth that would mask their 3 humanoid life signs from all but the most invasive up-close scans. There was a compartment just big enough for Nico, but Halden and Skylara would have to cram into a slightly bigger compartment. "I'm here," he said, gesturing to the cramped, dark space. "It's not the presidential suite, but it's safe." Nico crammed himself into the smaller compartment, obviously miserable, but trying to hide it. Then, Halden awkwardly opened the bigger compartment for Skylara to enter first. The compartment was a tangled, claustrophobic mess of thick power conduits, greasy coolant pipes, and humming machinery. There was barely enough room for one person to stand comfortably, let alone 2. Halden squeezed in beside her, pressing himself against the curved hull, the metal cool against his back. The hatch slid shut with a heavy, final-sounding thud, sealing them in near-total darkness and suffocating heat. They were pressed together, a miserable, sweaty tangle of limbs. Halden's back was against the cool outer hull, but Skylara was pressed chest to chest against him. He could feel every breath she took, the rise and fall of her chest against his. The air was thick with the scent of hot metal, of burnt-out capacitors, and her. A faint, clean scent like desert rain after a lightning storm. She exhaled, seeming to relax for the first time in a very, very long while. "Thank you, Alden," she said. "I'm sorry that I had to coerce you. I had to think of my son." Alden nodded. "It's all right. I understand. You did what you had to. Nico deserves better." Alden didn't even want to think about what having a father like Baron Kraid would be like, let alone being his wife. Alden tried to lighten the mood. "Besides, your kid's the only person in this sector who hasn't tried to shoot me. Yet." Skylara laughed, warm and lingering. He could tell she was getting loopy with sleep deprivation and relief to finally be somewhere relatively safe. Halden inhaled sharply when he felt her hand on his chest. You're Remarkably warm, she murmured, her voice a low vibration against his chest. For any species. Halden let out a short, humorless laugh. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm against her stillness. He was acutely aware of her thigh pressed against his, the curve of her hip slotted against his own. Comes with the species, he said, his voice a low rumble. Humans tend to run very hot under pressure. Probably could have worded that better. Fuck, Halden thought, as he felt his cheeks flush and was glad it was too dark for her to see it. He felt more than saw her smile in the darkness. A sharp, attractive huff of breath that cut through the tension. The air didn't cool, but the nature of their closeness changed. What had been a tactical necessity became a current, a live wire humming in the space between them. For a long time, the only sounds were the distant hum of the station outside, their own breathing, and the frantic, unspoken conversation of two bodies pressed together in the dark. Skylara slept first, and Halden was glad he could provide a space safe enough for her and Nico to rest. He fell asleep shortly after. Their next stop was a bleak asteroid pit stop, little more than a collection of pressurized domes clinging to a rock named Despair's End by some long-dead pessimistic miner. It was a place to get fuel and nutrient paste, and absolutely nothing else. Nico, after a day of subsisting on the bland, gray sludge that passed for food on the stray dog, had a violent metabolic reaction. It turned a pale shade of green, his skin clammy, and was curled into a miserable ball in his bunk, shivering. Skylara stood over him. A mask of worry etched on her perfect face. Her composure, usually so unshakable, was cracked. His system is sensitive, she said, her voice tight with a helplessness that seemed alien to her. Sensitive? The kid looks like he's about to puke up his own spleen, Halden observed. That nutrient paste is grade D garbage. He rummaged through a battered footlocker at the end of his own bunk, pulling out a small, portable heating element, a battered pan, and 2 sealed packets. Stand back, a master is at work. 20 minutes later, the recycled air of the ship was filled with a gloriously unhealthy aroma of melted cheese and boiled synth noodles. He presented a steaming bowl of what his mother had called emergency dinner to Nico. The boy's eyes went wide. He hesitantly took a bite, then another, then devoured the entire bowl with a fervor bordering on religious ecstasy, the color returning to his cheeks with every spoonful. Halden leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. Guess he's not a fan of that nutrient sludge, huh? Kid's got good taste. Skylara's face tightened. She looked from her son, now happily scraping the last bits of cheese from the bowl with his finger, to Halden. Her expression was guarded, almost sharp. His system is more selective than most, she said, her tone terse. It is a family trait. The words were a clear dismissal, a wall thrown up between them, but Halden saw past it. He saw, then, a brief, unguarded vulnerability in her gaze before her composure returned. She was a warrior queen, a fugitive noblewoman who could dismantle a squad of trained killers without breaking a sweat. But she couldn't conjure up a simple meal to soothe her sick child. That was a chink in her armor, a place where her formidable skills were useless. And for some stupid, illogical reason, it made him want to protect her even more. They were refueling at a remote mining outpost carved into a hollowed-out asteroid when the ambush came. 2 sleek, shark-like Syndicate interceptors dropped out of hyperspace with no warning, their engines flaring hot and angry against the black. "They're getting better at this!" Halden yelled, slamming the refueling clamp release button. "Everybody hang on!" The stray dog shot away from the docking arm, engines screaming. The fight was immediate and brutal. They were in the middle of the mining operations debris field. chunks of unrefined rock and discarded mining equipment tumbling through the blackness. A zero-gravity nightmare of high-velocity obstacles. "Take the helm! Keep us moving!" Halden shouted at Skylara, who slid into his seat without hesitation, her hands sure and steady on the controls as she weaved them through a deadly junk pile. "I need a distraction!" Halden yelled over the cacophony of alarms. He scrambled to a storage locker welded to the bulkhead, kicking the dented door open. Inside was a collection of his more creative engineering projects. He grabbed a hideous, clearly homemade device. It was a chaotic mess of exposed wires, 3 military-grade capacitors scavenged from a defunct torpedo, and what was unmistakably the motorized base of an old kitchen blender, all held together with obscene amounts of scrap wire and electrical tape. "All right, you bastard," he muttered, hefting the contraption as he armed its power sequence. "Let's see if the old blender still has any juice." He staggered to the cargo chute, primed the device, and shoved it in. "Fire in the hole!" The jury-rigged EMP detonated with a silent, brilliant blue-white flash that momentarily outshone the distant sun. The 2 Syndicate ships convulsed in space. Their lights flickered and died. Their weapon ports went dark. The engine sputtered and went silent. Skylara used this momentary chaos. With the interceptors drifting helplessly, she fired the stray dog's dorsal cannon. Her shots didn't target the hulls. Each bolt struck the exact center of a pilot's helmet visor, shattering the transparasteel. 2 ships, 2 pilots, neutralized without damaging the vessels. Cold, economical, terrifying. "Nice shooting," Halden breathed, his respect for her growing with every passing crisis. "My meat never piss you off." Skylara laughed, free and exhilarated. It must have been therapeutic to shove it to the Syndicate that had kept her prisoner for so long. An alarm blared, this one for proximity. The mining tunnel ahead of them, their only clear escape vector, was collapsing from the stray weapons fire. Chunks of rock the size of ground cars were shearing off the entrance. "No time to go around," Skylara shouted, her knuckles white on the console. "Didn't plan on it," Halden grinned, sliding back into the pilot seat as she moved aside. A wild, unhinged light filled his eyes. He shoved the throttle forward, aiming the stray dog straight into the crumbling maw of the tunnel. Rock and metal scraped and screeched against the shields as they barreled through the collapsing passage. They burst out on the other side into open space, trailing sparks and a cloud of asteroid dust like a triumphant, if battered, comet. Halden and Skylara looked at each other, panting, adrenaline singing in their veins. Then they started laughing. Loud, manic, half-insane laughter that filled the cockpit. In that moment, they weren't a smuggler and a fugitive. They were partners in a glorious, beautiful chaos. Even Nico joined in, having been in awe of both his mother and Halden, and the skill they both possessed. In the quiet aftermath, the adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind exhaustion and a litany of new aches. Halden was outside the ship in a pressure suit, assessing the damage to an external sensor array, when a sharp, searing pain made him hiss. A piece of shrapnel from the tunnel run had torn a nasty, deep gash in his forearm, just below the elbow. Blood was welling up, thick and dark against the white of his suit's inner lining. He stumbled back into the cockpit, pulling off his helmet and grabbing the medkit. His usual bravado faltered as he tried to clean and seal the wound one-handed, his fingers clumsy and slick in his own blood. Skylara watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she rose from her seat. "Give it here," she said, her voice soft. She took the medkit from his grasp, her touch surprisingly gentle. She pushed him into the pilot's seat and knelt before him. The cockpit felt impossibly tight, her proximity electric. She worked without wasted motion, her hands steady and pure, cleaning the wound with an antiseptic wipe that stung like hell. Halden gritted his teeth, forcing to be still under her ministrations. His usual sarcastic armor was gone, stripped away by pain and a strange, disarming vulnerability. "Careful," he grits out, watching her deft hands. "I wouldn't want you to mess up my moneymaker." He meant his arm, the one he used to fly and fight and fix things. She paused, meeting his gaze. Her stormy eyes were dark and serious. Her hands, holding a dermal regenerator, never stopped their work. "I'm more accustomed to causing wounds like this," she replied, her voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down his spine. "Not mending them." The air thickened, charged with everything they weren't saying. He was looking at a killer, a woman forged in a brutal, merciless world. But right now, her touch was that of a healer. He could smell the clean scent of the antiseptic and the fainter, personal scent of her skin. He was utterly, completely at her mercy. And for some reason, it didn't feel dangerous at all. It felt right. In the long, quiet hours of deep space, as they limped towards the coordinates for the graveyard, a fragile routine began to form. Alden found Nico staring listlessly out at the star field, the crushing boredom of space travel finally settling in. On a whim, Alden dug through another of his footlockers and produced a dusty, coiled spring of iridescent metal, a slinky. "Behold," he said with a grand gesture, "the secrets of astral navigation." He spent the next hour using the slinky to demonstrate gravitational wells, wormhole theory, and orbital mechanics. His explanations, a bizarre but surprisingly effective mix of real science and pure, unadulterated bullshit. Nico was captivated, his laughter echoing in the small cabin as the spring tumbled end over end in zero-G. Later, Halden came across Skylara in a small galley, her back to him. She was holding a small, flat, hollow pendant. It projected a faint, quavering image of several other Athalians, men, women, and children, with all the same regal bearing and striking features as her. Their faces were serene, but tinged with a deep, ancestral sadness. "Family?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Her head snapped up, and she quickly closed the pendant, the image vanishing. Her expression was distant, haunted. "My family branch," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "All that's left of it." Before he could ask more, she swept past him. The moment closed, the wall back up. But he'd seen it. The weight she carried wasn't just for her son, it was for her entire people. "All right, Hotshot, it's your turn." Alden slid out of the pilot seat and gestured to Nico. The boy's eyes went wide.
"Me? Fly the ship?"
"Just for a bit. Nothing builds confidence like being in command of several hundred tons of barely contained explosion," Alden said with a grin. He settled into the co-pilot seat, his hands hovering near the secondary controls. "Just keep her steady." Nico, overeager and buzzing with excitement, gripped the yoke. He overcorrected on a minor course adjustment, sending the stray dog into a lurch that nearly clipped a passing cargo freighter. Alarms blared. "Easy, easy," Alden said, his voice calm and steady. "Don't fight it. Feel the drift. A little nudge on the port thruster. There you go, see? You're a natural." He talked Nico through the maneuver, turning a near catastrophe into a game. When they were clear, Nico was beaming, his knuckles white but his face alight with pride. "Okay," Alden said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You mastered the evasive maneuvers. It's time for electronic warfare." He produced a modified datapad. "This is my personal toolkit. Most of it is boring diagnostic stuff, but I have added a few games." He swiped to a screen with a single massive icon, a stylized red skull with lightning bolts shooting from its eyes. Underneath it was the label, The Screamer.
"What does it do?"
Nico asked, his eyes wide with awe. "It's a comms jammer, a really, really obnoxious one. You hit this button, and it floods any open syndicate frequency channel with the most beautiful noise in the universe." He tapped a small preview button, and a blast of screeching guitars and thunderous drums from a long-dead Earth band called Iron Maw erupted for a second before he shut it off. It causes, confusion. Think of it as the next level of your training. He handed the datapad to Nico. It felt less like giving a child a toy and more like handing a novice wizard his first spellbook. The atmospheric condenser finally gave out over the Perseus arm. The air on the ship grew stale and humid, tasting of recycled breath and Halden's socks. Damn it, Halden cursed, staring at the red flashing light on his console. The primary scrubber's shot. We need a new catalytic filter, and they don't make them for a rust bucket this old. He hunched over his database, muttering to himself. But, that might be a long shot. He pulled up the schematic of a derelict vessel, the Starlight Serenade, an old Starlight-class pleasure liner. They went down in a meteor storm 60 years ago. They were famous for their high-grade environmental systems. Over-engineered. Should have the part that we need. Finding the derelict was easy. Docking with it was less so. When they finally cut their way through the hole, they found the ship eerily pristine. Infamous safety feature, Halden explained, his voice echoing in the silent, opulent corridors. In case of a major hull breach, the ship's AI would flash vent the entire atmosphere, sucks all the air out in less than a second, kills everyone on board instantly. But it preserves the ship's interior in a perfect, vacuum-sealed time capsule. Grim, but it's great for scavengers. They found the environmental section and, after some work, liberated the catalytic filter. On their way back, they passed through the grand ballroom. Lifeless figures in extravagant clothing were frozen in their final, panicked moments, floating in the zero gravity like grotesque puppets. It was macabre. In an adjoining luxury suite, Skylara paused, her gaze drawn to a closet door left slightly ajar. Curiosity piqued, she slid it open. Inside, untouched by time or disaster, were racks of pristine garments. Her eyes landed on a dress of deep sapphire silk that caught the dim light, its surface seeming to flow like liquid even in the dim light of their headlamps. Go on, Halden nudged her, but aloft. She hesitated. Then, a rare, mischievous glint appeared in her eye. She disappeared into the suite. When she stepped back out, Halden's witty commentary died in his throat. The gown fit her as if it were made for her. It clung to the elegant lines of her body, the sapphire fabric a stark contrast to her pale skin. With the dust and grime of a journey momentarily forgotten, she looked every inch the noble woman she was. A queen in exile. I felt his throat go dry. She noticed his slack-jawed silence. A small, knowing smile played across her lips as she glided closer. The beams of their headlamps met, and she tilted her head, her gaze analytical, yet intimate. Human pupils are quite expressive, she murmured, her voice a low thrum in the dead quiet of the ghost ship. They dilate in low light, of course, but also in response to other stimuli. Halden swallowed, genuinely flustered. He was captivated, his usual arsenal of quips and sarcastic retorts completely deserting him. He took a step closer, his voice coming out a little rougher, a little more raw than he intended. Yeah, well, you are not exactly helping them stay professional right now. It wasn't a comeback. It was an admission, a concession. And in the silent space between them, it was far more intimate than any boast. During the long, tedious process of installing the new filter, Halden found Nico watching him, a small, intense shadow. The boy was fascinated by the tools, the deliberate, step-by-step way Halden took apart one system to fix another. Halden wiped his greasy hands on a rag and dug them into his pocket. He pulled out a small, sturdy Terran folding knife with a simple, worn wooden handle. He held it out to the boy. This was my father's, Halden said, and his father's before him. It's not a weapon, it's a tool. There is a difference. Nico took it, his eyes wide. The knife felt heavy and important in his small hands. A weapon is for hunting. Alden continued, his voice serious. A tool is for building, for fixing, for surviving. You use it to strip a wire, open a ration pack, cut a line that's tangled. You use it to make things work. He spent the next hour showing Nico how to safely open and close the blade, how to hold it, how to shave a thin curl of plastic from a spare conduit casing, how to carve a spoon from scrap wood. For Nico, a child who had only ever known weapons of extreme violence, this small, simple gift was a revelation. It was a promise of a different way to face the world. Not every sharp thing needed to be about violence. Sometimes it could be about creation. A lead on the sun shards finally came through a coded message from an old contact. It pointed them to a neon-drenched black market on the asteroid city of Cinder. The contact was an old acquaintance of Halden's named Skitter, a sniveling information broker with loyalties as flexible as a wet noodle. They met in the back of a noodle bar that smelled of stale synthale and desperation. The air was thick with smoke and colored by the flickering hollows outside.
Halden, my old friend!
Skitter wheezed, his eyes darting nervously towards Skylara and Nico.
Big trouble follows you these days, eh?
Cut the chatter, Skitter, Halden said, his hand resting near the blaster holstered on his hip. The info as it could.
The best!
Skitter grinned, revealing a set of mismatched chrome teeth.
The derelict. The omen is right where you heard. Coordinates are solid.
He slid a data chip across the sticky table. Halden picked it up. His instincts were screaming. This was too easy. Skitter's grin faltered.
Business is business, Halden.
That's when the noodle bar's exits were suddenly filled with imposing silhouettes of Crimson Syndicate enforcers, their armor catching the neon haze in slick, wet-looking reflections.
The bounty on them was just too good, Halden.
Skitter squeaked, diving under the table.
Nothing personal.
I'm going to take it very personally, Halden growled, drawing his blaster. The noodle bar exploded into a whirlwind of chaos. Tables flipped, patrons screamed, and blaster bolts turned the walls into Swiss cheese. Skylara was a blur of motion. A weapon, elegant and deadly, snapped into her hand, a handle that extruded a meter-long ribbon of hard light that wavered at the edges like heat haze. A whip sword. She moved through the enforcers like a dancer, the blade a flicking tongue of energy that disarmed and disabled, each movement economical, each strike finding a joint or weapon, ending a threat without wasted energy. Halden, however, embraced a cruder approach. He kicked over a heavy table for cover, laying down suppressing fire. But they were pinned down, outnumbered. He spotted a massive, greasy cargo forklift parked in the adjoining alley. An idea, a stupid, glorious Haldenian idea, sparked in his brain. "Cover me!" he yelled to Skylara. He sprinted for the forklift, hot-wiring the ignition, his fingers finding the right wires by feel and twisting them together in a quick, familiar motion that spoke of long experience. The engines roared to life with a belch of acrid smoke. "Time to take out the trash!" he roared, slamming the vehicle into gear. He used the forklift as a battering ram, a 2-ton beast of plasteel and hydraulics, plowing through enforcers and their barricades. Just as he smashed through the main entrance, he saw an enforcer get the drop on Skylara. The man had her flanked, his rifle raising for a kill shot. She was occupied with 2 others. Halden was wrestling with the clumsy controls of the forklift, too far away to shoot. He needed a distraction, now. His hand instinctively went to his belt, to the ridiculous, brightly colored rubber chicken that dangled there. He'd won it in a bet years ago and kept it for luck. Without a second thought, he He ripped it from his belt and squeezed it with all his might. A loud, absurd, penetrating squawk echoed through the alley, cutting through the din of battle. The sound was so alien, so profoundly stupid, that the elite battle-hardened enforcer flinched. His training prepared him for blaster fire, for explosions, for screamed obscenities. It had not prepared him for weaponized poultry. That 1-second hesitation was all Skylara needed. She spun, her whip sword lashing out, and the enforcer's rifle went flying. The tide turned completely when a new sound ripped through the air. A deafening, screeching blast of Terran heavy metal music. Alden glanced toward their hiding spot and saw Nico, pale but resolute, holding the datapad. It hit the screamer. The Syndicate comms channel, which they used for tactical coordination, was flooded with incomprehensible, demonic noise. The enforcers clutched at their helmets. The coordination shattered. "Let's go!" Alden yelled, gesturing for them to jump onto the forklift. They scrambled aboard as he plowed a path through the confused goons and out into the crowded market street, leaving chaos and a very confused noodle bar owner in their wake. Cut to the bridge of a Syndicate command ship, a vessel of obsidian angles and merciless order. An officer stood stiffly, his face pale as he delivered his report via holocom to the shadowed, imposing figure of Baron Crade.
Baron Crade, they escaped.
The officer stammered, his voice strained. There was a long, cold silence on the other end. "Explain." Crade's voice finally boomed, a sound like grinding glaciers.
Sir, they utilized a cargo loader, a T-12 industrial model, and a primitive acoustic assault, and some kind of avian sonics.
The officer's professional military vocabulary utterly failed him.
We are still analyzing the squawk frequency, my lord. It appears they have no offensive capabilities, yet it proved tactically effective.
The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the voice. The highly trained professional couldn't describe a rubber chicken and rock music. This was why they kept failing. Crade's rigid, ordered world had no counter-procedure for sheer, unadulterated human lunacy. Halden's sanctuary was an asteroid. Not a city, not a base, just a rock. He'd hollowed it out himself over the years, fitting it with life support, a power core, and camouflaging systems that made it invisible to all but the most dedicated, eyeball-level search. It was his bolt hole, his secret home. When the massive, camouflaged hangar door sealed behind the battered stray dog, a profound silence fell. They were, for the first time in weeks, truly safe. The adrenaline of the escape finally drained away, replaced by an exhausted, bone-deep intimacy. They weren't just a smuggler and his cargo anymore. They were a crew. They were survivors, staring at Skylara, her face smudged with soot, and Nico, who was trying to look brave, but was trembling slightly. Alden felt a fierce, protective surge that had nothing to do with the sun shards or bargains. This felt like home. These people felt like his. They would have to continue running from Crade, but Halden had a few hiding places up his sleeve if he needed. With resources and wit, he and Skylara could probably make it, and give Nico a safe environment to grow up. Even though Halden promised himself that if he ever got close enough, if he ever got the chance, he would slit Crade's throat himself. Later, as they were running a systems check on the bridge of the stray dog, a secondary power conduit for the lighting flickered and died, plunging half the room into darkness. Alden sighed. Another thing to fix. Before he could move, Nico, who had been quietly sitting in the co-pilot's chair, slipped to the floor. He went to the open access panel, holding the small Terran folding knife Halden had given him. His small hands were surprisingly steady, mimicking the lessons Halden had taught him. He used the tip of the blade not to pry or cut, but to carefully nudge a loose power coupling back into its housing. The connection sparked, and the lights flickered back to full strength. Nico looked up, his face breaking into a beam of pure, unadulterated pride.
I fixed it, Halden, with the tool.
Halden grinned. That you did, kid. That you did. But it was the look on Skylara's face that stole the air from Halden's lungs. She was staring at her son, then at the knife in his hand, and then at Halden. It was pride in her eyes. A profound, earth-shattering realization. She had just watched her son, the heir to a violent and powerful legacy, use a blade not to harm, not to threaten, not to kill, but to build, to repair, to bring back the light. In that single, quiet moment, she saw the future she wanted for him. And she saw the man who had shown him it was possible. It was the final, definitive proof she needed. Halden Ulrich, the chaotic, sarcastic mess of a human, was everything his father was not. He was a creator, not a destroyer. That night, Halden stood in the sanctuary's main cavern, staring out of a massive viewport at the swirling colors of a distant nebula. The silence was a balm. He heard a soft footstep behind him and turned to see Skylara. She was wearing a simple tunic she'd found in the station's stores, but she still carried herself with the grace of a queen. I need to tell you the truth, Halden, she began, her voice low and serious. She came to stand beside him, her gaze fixed on the river of stars. The full truth. He waited, sensing this was more than just a debriefing. My people, the Aethalians, they are a dying race, she said, her voice laced with an ancient sorrow. A genetic flaw, introduced centuries ago during a civil war, made us fragile. Our numbers dwindle with every generation. Procreation is not a casual act for us. It is a sacred, vital duty. The continuation of a bloodline is everything. She turned to face him, her stormy eyes locking onto his. I fled Kraid not just because he is a tyrant. I fled because he is an unworthy father. His legacy is one of power through destruction, one of control through fear. To bring another child into that, to have my bloodline continue through him was a desecration. She took a step closer. The air grew heavy. I have watched you, Halden Ulrich. I have seen you navigate chaos with a grin. I have seen you teach my son that a tool is for mending things. I have seen you laugh in the face of death and make a feast from the scraps. You are brave. You are kind in your own rough way. You are a protector. Your legacy is one of creation through chaos. Her gaze was fierce, hopeful, and terrifyingly sincere. I need to secure a future for my son, and I need to secure the future of my line. And to do that, I need a partner that I can trust. A worthy father. She took a deep breath. Her shoulders squared as if bracing for his refusal. I am formally asking you, Halden, to be the father of my next child. Not just to save my species, but because you are the man that I have chosen. Halden felt like he'd been hit by a cargo hauler. His brain simply shut down. Father, her child, dying race. The words echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of his mind. He looked from Skylara's intense, beautiful face to the viewport, where Nico's reflection was faintly visible. The boy was asleep on a nearby cot, curled up, the small wooden-handled knife resting on the table beside him like a treasured possession. The life he had known, the life of a lone wolf, of fast getaways and empty beds, of looking out for only number one, was over. It had ended the moment that defiant little boy had glared at him from the co-pilot's seat. He just hadn't known it until now. A slow grin, an expression of equal parts abject terror, Profound shock and pure, unadulterated excitement spread across his face. He met Skylara's gaze, the galaxy swirling behind her like a promise. "Wow," he said, his voice a low, throaty rumble. "A guy who can jury-rig an EMP from a blunder can probably handle a little advanced biology." He closed the remaining distance between them, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "When do we start?" He swept her into his arms. "Does right now sound good to you?" Skylara laughed, a sound Halden had come to love. "Yes," she whispered, cupping his face. He kissed her. Throughout the night, Halden fought for his life in more ways than one. But it had never been so pleasurable or exhilarating before.